Marcus Wellington stepped out of his custom Rolls-Royce Phantom, the diamond-studded door handles catching the afternoon sunlight as his Italian leather shoes touched the pristine cobblestones of Buckingham Palace's forecourt. At 62 years old, he had built an empire worth $8 billion. Through ruthless business deals and an unshakable belief that every person had a price, his silver hair was perfectly styled, his Armani suit cost more than most people's cars, and his Patek Philippe watch alone could buy a house in central London. The tech mogul had flown in from Silicon Valley specifically for this moment. After years of failed attempts to secure a private audience with the royal family through proper channels, he had devised what he considered a foolproof plan. Marcus had researched the palace guards extensively, learning their schedules, their backgrounds, and most importantly, their salaries. In his mind, these were just working-class men in fancy uniforms who could easily be swayed by the right amount of money. As he approached the ornate gates, Marcus felt the familiar rush of power that came with being one of the world's wealthiest individuals. I'd bribed politicians, judges, and CEOs across 3 continents. Surely a few palace guards would be no different. His briefcase contained not documents or contracts, but something far more persuasive. £5 million in untraceable cryptocurrency codes, each worth enough to change a guard's life forever. The afternoon crowds of tourists gathered behind the barriers, cameras clicking as they tried to catch glimpses of royal activity. Marcus ignored them completely, his focus entirely on the 2 guards standing at attention near the main entrance. Their red tunics were immaculate, their bearskin hats perfectly positioned, and their rifles held with military precision. These were the famous Queen's Guard, soldiers who had become as much a symbol of Britain as the monarchy itself. What Marcus didn't know was that these weren't just ceremonial figures in costume. The men he was approaching were highly trained soldiers from elite regiments, many with combat experience in Afghanistan and Iraq. They had sworn sacred oaths to protect the royal family, oaths that went far deeper than any employment contract. Their loyalty wasn't something that could be purchased. Their integrity had been tested in life-and-death situations that Marcus could never imagine. Guard James. Mitchell stood motionless at his post, his trained eyes automatically scanning the crowd even as he maintained the traditional stoic expression. At 31, he was a decorated sergeant with the Coldstream Guards who had served 3 tours of duty overseas. His partner, Guard William Thompson, was equally experienced. A veteran of the Welsh Guards with commendations for bravery under fire. Both men had dedicated their lives to service, honor, duty concepts that Marcus had never truly understood. As the billionaire strutted closer, his confidence radiated from every step. He had rehearsed his approach a dozen times in his hotel suite, calculating exactly how much money it would take to convince these guards to arrange a private meeting with a member of the royal family. In his warped worldview, everyone was motivated by greed, and it was simply a matter of finding the right price point. The security cameras hidden throughout the palace grounds were already tracking Marcus's movement and the plainclothes protection. Officers mingling with the tourists had noted his unusual behavior. His expensive appearance and purposeful stride toward the guards had triggered subtle alerts throughout the security network. What Marcus assumed would be a simple transaction was about to become a lesson in the difference between wealth and worth. The stage was set for a confrontation that would strip away Marcus's illusions about power and reveal the true meaning of incorruptible service. As he reached into his briefcase and prepared to make his offer, he had no idea that he was about to face men whose honor couldn't be bought at any price. Marcus approached the 2 guards with the swagger of a man who had never been told no. He stopped directly in front of Guard Mitchell, close enough that other tourists began to notice the unusual interaction. The billionaire's cologne mixed with the crisp London air as he leaned slightly forward, his voice dropping to what he thought was a conspiratorial whisper. "Gentlemen, I have a business proposition that could change your lives," Marcus began, his American accent cutting through the ambient noise of the tourist crowd. He opened his briefcase slightly, revealing the sleek tablet containing the cryptocurrency codes. "I'm Marcus Wellington. Perhaps you've heard of Wellington Technologies. I'm worth more money than you'll see in 10 lifetimes." Guard Mitchell's eyes remained fixed straight ahead, his expression unchanged. This was standard protocol. The Queen's Guard were trained to ignore attempts at interaction from the public. But Marcus interpreted the silence as interest rather than professionalism. In his mind, the guard was simply waiting to hear the offer before responding. "I need a private meeting with any member of the royal family," Marcus continued, his voice gaining confidence as he mistook the guard's silence for negotiation. "Just 10 minutes. I have a revolutionary technology that could benefit the crown enormously. Name your price. I'm talking about enough money to retire tomorrow, buy a mansion, send your children to the finest schools." A small crowd of onlookers began to form, sensing drama unfolding. Some pulled out their phones, beginning to record what appeared to be an unusual confrontation with the famous guards. Marcus was too focused on his pitch to notice the growing audience or the subtle hand signals being exchanged between security personnel in the background. £2 million each, Marcus announced, pulling out his tablet and showing the cryptocurrency wallet interface to the guards. "All you have to do is arrange one brief meeting. No one gets hurt, no rules get broken in any serious way. Just bend the protocol slightly for a legitimate businessman." "No, guard." Thompson finally moved, but only to adjust his grip on his rifle. A subtle but clear message that Marcus completely missed. The billionaire took the movement as encouragement and increased his offer. "Fine, $3 million each. That's enough to buy homes for your entire families. I've done this before with government officials around the world. Everyone has a price, and I'm offering yours." Marcus's voice was getting louder, his frustration beginning to show as the guards maintained their professional silence. What Marcus didn't understand was that his offers weren't being ignored. They were being carefully documented. Hidden. Microphones were recording every word, and the security footage would later be analyzed frame by frame. The plainclothes officers in the crowd were positioning themselves strategically, ready to intervene if the situation escalated further. "Look, I'm not asking you to betray your country," Marcus pressed on, his business instincts telling him to sweeten the deal. "This is just a minor favor between gentlemen. £4 million each, plus I'll throw in stock options in my company. You could be millionaires by Christmas." The crowd around them grew larger, with tourists from various countries watching in fascination as this well-dressed man appeared to be arguing with the immovable guards. Children pointed and asked their parents what was happening, while teenagers live-streamed the encounter on social media. Marcus remained oblivious to his growing audience, convinced that persistence would eventually crack the guard's resolve. $5 million is my final offer," he declared, waving the tablet more dramatically. "I could buy and sell both of you 100 times over. I'm offering you the chance of a lifetime here. Don't be stupid about this." The insult hung in the air like a challenge. For the first time, Guard Mitchell's jaw twitched almost imperceptibly, not from temptation, but from the effort of maintaining professional composure in the face of such disrespect. These were men who had faced enemy fire without flinching, who had carried wounded comrades to safety under hostile conditions, who had sworn oaths that meant more to them than life itself. Marcus sensed what he thought was weakness and prepared to close what he assumed would be a deal. He had no idea that his next words would trigger a response that would shatter his worldview and teach him that some things in life truly cannot be purchased. Guard Mitchell finally broke his silence, but not in the way Marcus expected. Without moving his head or changing his rigid posture, he spoke in a clear, authoritative voice that carried the weight of military training and unshakable conviction. "Sir, you need to step back from the gates immediately," Mitchell commanded, his tone respectful, but absolutely firm. "What you're suggesting is not only illegal, but it's an insult to everything we represent." Marcus blinked in surprise. This wasn't how these conversations usually went. In his experience, initial resistance was just part of the negotiation process. People always said no first, then gradually warmed to the idea once they understood the full scope of his offer. "Let me explain this more clearly," Marcus said, his voice taking on the condescending tone he used with difficult business partners. "I'm offering you generational wealth. Your great-grandchildren could live like royalty themselves. One simple favor that hurts absolutely no one." Guard Thompson stepped forward slightly, his movement precise and deliberate. Sir, the Queen's Guard cannot and will not be bribed, threatened, or influenced in any way. Our duty is to protect the royal family, and that duty is not for sale at any price. The crowd had grown to nearly 50 people, with phones recording from multiple angles. Marcus finally noticed the audience but misinterpreted their presence as validation of his importance. Surely these guards wouldn't want to embarrass themselves in front of so many witnesses by refusing such a generous offer. "You're making a mistake," Marcus insisted, his frustration beginning to show. "Do you know who I am? I've had dinner with presidents. I've negotiated treaties. I've single-handedly changed the course of international commerce. I'm not some tourist trying to get a selfie. We know exactly who you are, Mr. Wellington," Guard Mitchell replied, using Marcus's name for the first time. Surprised the billionaire. He hadn't expected to be recognized. "Your reputation precedes you, which is precisely why this conversation needs to end now." What Marcus didn't know was that his name had been flagged in security databases months ago when he first began making inquiries about private royal audiences through unofficial channels. Intelligence services had been monitoring his attempts to use wealth and influence to bypass proper protocols. His arrival at the palace gates wasn't unexpected, it was anticipated. "My reputation should tell you that I always get what I want," Marcus said, his voice hardening. "And I always pay well for services rendered. £10 million, final offer. That's more money than both of you will earn in your entire careers combined." A murmur rippled through the crowd as people heard the astronomical sum being discussed. Some tourists exchanged glances, wondering if they were witnessing something that would make international news. But the guards remained unmoved, their expressions showing nothing but professional disdain for the attempted corruption. "Mr. Wellington," Guard Thompson said, his Welsh accent adding gravity to his words, "I've served in Afghanistan, where I watched friends die defending principles you clearly don't understand. My colleague here earned a medal for valor saving civilians under enemy fire. We've both sworn sacred oaths that we would rather die than break." The simple dignity of Thompson's statement hit Marcus like a physical blow. For the first time in decades, he found himself in a situation where his wealth meant absolutely nothing. These men weren't impressed by his money, intimidated by his reputation, or interested in his offers. They were something he had never encountered before, truly incorruptible. "Everyone has a price," Marcus insisted, though his voice now carried a note of desperation. "Maybe it's not money. Maybe it's something else you want. Title, political influence. You can arrange meetings with prime ministers, tech executives, media moguls." Guard Mitchell's response was swift and final. "Sir, you have 30 seconds to leave this area voluntarily, or we will call the Metropolitan Police to escort you away." Attempted bribery of public officials is a serious criminal offense. The word criminal sent a shock through Marcus's system. In all his years of using money to smooth difficult situations, no one had ever threatened him with actual legal consequences. He looked around at the crowd, suddenly aware that dozens of cameras were recording what could become a very public humiliation, for the first time since arriving in London. Marcus Wellington felt genuinely afraid. Before Marcus could respond to the 30-second ultimatum, 3 plainclothes, Metropolitan Police officers emerged from the crowd with the practiced ease of professionals who had been monitoring the situation from the beginning. Detective Inspector Sarah Chen, a 20-year veteran of the force, approached Marcus with her warrant card clearly displayed. "Mr. Marcus Wellington, you're under arrest on suspicion of attempted bribery of public officials," she announced in a clear voice that carried across the now silent crowd. "You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defense if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court." The billionaire's face went pale as the reality of his situation crashed down upon him. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered, looking around desperately, as if expecting someone to intervene on his behalf. "I'm an American citizen. I have diplomatic contacts. I demand to speak to my embassy immediately." Detective Chen continued the formal caution. With professional calm, while her colleagues positioned themselves on either side of Marcus, "Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Do you understand these rights as I have explained them to you?" The crowd had grown to over 100 people, with tourists from around the world capturing every moment of the arrest. Social media. Feeds began lighting up with videos titled "Billionaire Arrested at Buckingham Palace. An American Mogul Tries to Bribe Royal Guards." Within minutes, the footage was being shared thousands of times across multiple platforms. "You don't understand," Marcus said, his voice rising in panic as he realized his carefully planned visit was turning into a nightmare. "I wasn't actually trying to bribe anyone. It was just a misunderstanding, a cultural difference. In America, we call this networking." Detective Inspector Chen had heard similar excuses countless times throughout her career. "Sir, we have clear audio and video evidence of you offering specific monetary amounts in exchange for unauthorized access to members of the royal family. That constitutes attempted bribery under British law, regardless of your nationality or cultural background." One of the officers began searching Marcus's briefcase, discovering the tablet containing the cryptocurrency codes, exactly as he had described. The digital evidence would later prove crucial in demonstrating premeditation and the seriousness of his attempted crime. "My lawyers will have you all fired," Marcus threatened, his usual confidence cracking as handcuffs were produced. "I have connections at the highest levels of government. I've donated millions to political campaigns. This arrest is a mistake that will cost all of your careers." Guard Mitchell, who had remained at his post throughout the arrest, finally allowed himself a slight smile. "Sir, threatening police officers is another offense you might want to avoid adding to your charges." The irony wasn't lost on the growing crowd of spectators. A man who had built his fortune on the belief that everything and everyone could be bought was discovering that the very institutions he sought to corrupt were the ones now holding him accountable for his actions. As Marcus was led away from the palace gates, his expensive suit wrinkled and his perfectly styled hair now disheveled, he caught sight of his reflection in the window of a passing police van. For the first time in his adult life, he looked powerless, vulnerable, completely out of control. The arrest made international headlines within hours. News outlets across the globe picked up the story of the tech billionaire who thought he could bribe his way into Buckingham Palace. Financial markets reacted immediately, with Wellington Technologies stock dropping 15% in after-hours trading as investors questioned the judgment and character of the company's leadership. Back at the palace gates, guards Mitchell and Thompson resumed their positions as if nothing had happened. The crowd gradually dispersed, tourists moving on to other attractions, but the two soldiers remained focused on their duty. They had faced down a different kind of enemy that day, not bullets or bombs, but corruption itself, and they had emerged victorious. The briefcase full of cryptocurrency codes was seized as evidence, its contents representing not just the attempted bribe but also Marcus's complete misunderstanding of the men he had tried to corrupt. To him, those digital numbers represented power and influence. To the guards, they represented everything they stood against, the belief that honor, duty, and integrity could be purchased like commodities in a marketplace. Before Marcus could respond to the 30-second ultimatum, 3 plainclothes Metropolitan Police officers emerged from the crowd with the practiced ease of professionals who had been monitoring the situation from the beginning. Detective Inspector Sarah Chen, a 20-year veteran of the force, approached Marcus with her warrant card clearly displayed. "Mr. Marcus Wellington, you're under arrest on suspicion of attempted bribery of public officials," she announced in a clear voice that carried across the NAL silent crowd. "You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defense if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court." The billionaire's face went pale as the reality of his situation crashed down upon him. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered, looking around desperately as if expecting someone to intervene on his behalf. "I'm an American citizen. I have diplomatic contacts. I demand to speak to my embassy immediately." Detective Chen continued the formal caution with professional calm while her colleagues positioned themselves on either side of Marcus. "Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Do you understand these rights as I have explained them to you?" The crowd had grown to over 100 people, with tourists from around the world capturing every moment of the arrest. Social media. Feeds began lighting up with videos titled "Billionaire Arrested at Buckingham Palace. An American Mogul Tries to Bribe Royal Guards." Within minutes, the footage was being shared thousands of times across multiple platforms. "You don't understand," Marcus said, his voice rising in panic as he realized his carefully planned visit was turning into a nightmare. "I wasn't actually trying to bribe anyone. It was just a misunderstanding, a cultural difference. In America, we call this networking." Detective Inspector Chen had heard similar excuses countless times throughout her career. "Sir, we have clear audio and video evidence of you offering specific monetary amounts in exchange for unauthorized access to members of the royal family. That constitutes attempted bribery under British law, regardless of your nationality or cultural background." One of the officers began searching Marcus's briefcase, discovering the tablet containing the cryptocurrency codes, exactly as he had described. The digital evidence would later prove crucial in demonstrating premeditation and the seriousness of his attempted crime. "My lawyers will have you all fired," Marcus threatened, his usual confidence cracking as handcuffs were produced. "I have connections at the highest levels of government. I've donated millions to political campaigns. This arrest is a mistake that will cost all of your careers." Guard Mitchell, who had remained at his post throughout the arrest, finally allowed himself a slight smile. "Sir, threatening police officers is another offense you might want to avoid adding to your charges." The irony wasn't lost on the growing crowd of spectators. A man who had built his fortune on the belief that everything and everyone could be bought was discovering that the very institutions he sought to corrupt were the ones now holding him accountable for his actions. As Marcus was led away from the palace gates, his expensive suit wrinkled and his perfectly styled hair now disheveled, he caught sight of his reflection in the window of a passing police van. For the first time in his adult life, he looked powerless, vulnerable, completely out of control. The arrest made international headlines within hours. News outlets across the globe picked up the story of the tech billionaire who thought he could bribe his way into Buckingham Palace. Financial markets reacted immediately, with Wellington Technologies stock dropping 15% in after-hours trading as investors questioned the judgment and character of the company's leadership. Back at the palace gates, guards Mitchell and Thompson resumed their positions as if nothing had happened. The crowd gradually dispersed, tourists moving on to other attractions, but the two soldiers remained focused on their duty. They had faced down a different kind of enemy that day, not bullets or bombs, but corruption itself, and they had emerged victorious. The briefcase full of cryptocurrency codes was seized as evidence, its contents representing not just the attempted bribe, but also Marcus's complete misunderstanding of the men he had tried to corrupt. To him, those digital numbers represented power and influence. To the guards, they represented everything. They stood against the belief that honor, duty, and integrity could be purchased like commodities in a marketplace. The footage of Marcus Wellington's arrest spread across the internet like wildfire, becoming one of the most watched videos of the year. Within 24 hours, #BillionaireBribe was trending on every major social platform, with millions of people sharing their reactions to the spectacular fall from grace they had witnessed. Major news networks picked up the story immediately. CNN ran it as their lead story with the headline "Tech Mogul's Royal Blunder." The BBC provided extensive coverage, interviewing security experts who praised the professionalism of the Queen's Guard. Even international outlets like Al Jazeera and Deutsche Welle covered the incident, presenting it as an example of British institutional integrity versus American corporate arrogance. Marcus sat in a holding cell at Paddington Green Police Station. His designer suit now wrinkled and stained, his usual confidence completely shattered. The small, windowless room was a stark contrast to his usual environment of luxury penthouses and private jets. He had been allowed one phone call, which he used to contact his high-powered legal team in New York. But even they seemed shocked by the magnitude of his mistake. "How was I supposed to know they couldn't be bought?" he asked his lawyer during their first consultation. "Everyone has a price. That's basic economics. These guards are just working-class soldiers making modest salaries. The math should have been simple."
His legal team.
led by senior partner Catherine Morrison, had handled numerous corporate scandals over the years, but nothing quite like this. Marcus, you attempted to bribe members of one of the most respected military units in the world. On camera, in front of hundreds of witnesses. This isn't a white-collar regulatory issue. We can negotiate away quietly. Meanwhile, the impact on Wellington Technologies was devastating. The company's board of directors held an emergency meeting, several members calling for Marcus's immediate resignation. Stock prices continued to plummet as major investors began dumping their shares. Corporate partners started reviewing their contracts, worried about the reputational damage of being associated with the scandal. The guard who had arrested Marcus, Detective Inspector Chen, became something of a celebrity herself. She was invited to speak at law enforcement conferences about corruption and integrity. Her handling of the case praised as a textbook example of professional policing. The two Queen's Guards, Mitchell and Thompson, were commended by their superiors. Though they themselves preferred to avoid the media attention, social media was merciless in its mockery of Marcus. Memes flooded the internet showing him in handcuffs with captions like, "When you think everything has a price tag and Billionaire discovers something money can't buy." Comedy shows featured sketches about wealthy Americans trying to purchase increasingly ridiculous things from British institutions. The most damaging coverage came from investigative journalists who began digging into Marcus's past business dealings. They discovered a pattern of using wealth and influence to bypass regulations, manipulate officials, and gain unfair advantages over competitors. What had once been seen as shrewd business acumen was now being reframed as systematic corruption. Former employees came forward with stories of how Marcus had created a corporate culture where ethical corners were regularly cut in pursuit of profit. Regulatory agencies in multiple countries began reviewing past decisions involving Wellington Technologies, wondering if improper influence had been applied. Marcus's ex-wife, from whom he had divorced 5 years earlier, gave a particularly damaging interview to a prominent magazine. "This doesn't surprise me at all," she said. Marcus never understood that some things can't be bought. He tried to purchase friendship, respect, even love. He thought his money made him superior to everyone else. The psychological impact on Marcus was profound. For the first time in his adult life, he was facing consequences that his wealth couldn't eliminate. He couldn't buy his way out of the criminal charges, couldn't purchase a better reputation, couldn't acquire the respect he had lost. The fundamental belief system that had driven his success was crumbling around him. His attempts to control the narrative backfired spectacularly. A hastily arranged press conference, where he tried to frame the incident as a cultural misunderstanding, only made things worse. His lawyers visibly cringed as he continued to demonstrate his complete lack of understanding about why his actions were wrong. "I was simply trying to facilitate a business meeting," he told the assembled reporters. "In Silicon Valley, we call this networking," offered fair compensation for a service. "I don't understand why everyone is treating this like some kind of serious crime." The press conference became another viral sensation, with viewers amazed by his continued arrogance and lack of remorse. Legal experts appearing on news shows explained that his public statements were likely making his defense more difficult, as they demonstrated a clear intent to circumvent proper channels through monetary influence. 6 months later, Marcus Wellington stood in the dock at Westminster Magistrates Court, looking remarkably different from the confident billionaire who had approached Buckingham Palace. His hair had grown grayer, his face showed lines of stress that hadn't been there before. His expensive suit couldn't hide the defeat in his posture. The judge, Honorable Justice Patricia Whitfield, had reviewed all the evidence carefully. The prosecution had presented a compelling case, supported by clear video footage, audio recordings, and testimony from multiple witnesses. Marcus's defense team had argued for cultural misunderstanding and claimed their client never intended actual bribery, but the evidence was overwhelming. "Mr. Wellington," Justice Whitfield began, "you have been found guilty of attempted bribery of public officials, a serious offense that strikes at the heart of public trust in our institutions. Your actions were not a cultural misunderstanding, as your defense suggests, but a calculated attempt to use your wealth to circumvent proper channels and gain unauthorized access. The courtroom was packed with journalists, legal observers, and members of the public who had followed the case with fascination. Marcus's fall from grace had captivated people around the world, serving as a powerful reminder that even the wealthiest individuals were not above the law. The court sentences you to 18 months in prison, suspended for 2 years, conditional upon payment of a fine of £2 million to the Crown Prosecution Service. And completion of 300 hours of community service, the judge continued. You are also banned from entering any royal residences or approaching within 500 meters of any member of the royal family for a period of 10 years. The financial penalty, while significant, was less damaging to Marcus than the complete destruction of his reputation and business empire. Wellington Technologies had been forced into bankruptcy, unable to survive the massive loss of investors, partners, and clients. The company's innovative technologies were sold off to competitors, and hundreds of employees lost their jobs. Marcus's personal fortune, once valued at $8 billion, had shrunk to less than $50 million after legal fees, fines, and the collapse of his primary asset. He was still wealthy by most standards, but the psychological impact of losing 95% of his net worth was devastating to a man who had defined himself entirely through financial success. The community service portion of his sentence proved to be unexpectedly transformative. Marcus was assigned to work at a veterans rehabilitation center in East London, helping former soldiers adjust to civilian life after military service. Many of these men and women had served alongside guards like Mitchell and Thompson, and they shared similar values of honor, duty, and service, working directly with people who had sacrificed for others, rather than exploiting them for profit, slowly began to change Marcus's perspective. He met soldiers who had given up lucrative private sector opportunities to serve their country, who had risked their lives for principles rather than profit, who found meaning in service rather than accumulation. One veteran, a former Royal Marine, named David Clark, who had lost his leg in Afghanistan, became particularly influential in Marcus's rehabilitation. "You know what the difference is between you and us?" David asked during one of their conversations. "We learned early that the most valuable things in life can't be bought, sold, or traded. Honor, loyalty, courage, integrity, these things have to be earned and maintained every single day." The media gradually lost interest in Marcus's story as new scandals emerged to capture public attention. But the impact of his humiliation at Buckingham Palace continued to resonate. Business schools began using his case as a study in corporate ethics, examining how unchecked wealth and power could lead to spectacular failures of judgment. Guards Mitchell and Thompson returned to their regular duties, largely unchanged by their brief moment of fame. They had simply done their jobs, upholding the standards and values they had sworn to protect. Their incorruptible response to Marcus's bribery attempt became part of the proud history of the Queen's Guard, a reminder that some institutions remained immune to the corrupting influence of money. Marcus eventually completed his community service and slowly began rebuilding his life, though he would never again achieve his former wealth or influence. The man who had once believed that everything had a price had learned, in the most public and humiliating way possible, that the most important things in life, respect, integrity, honor, and trust, truly cannot be purchased. His story became a cautionary tale told in boardrooms and business schools around the world, a reminder that wealth without wisdom, power without principle, and success without integrity ultimately lead to failure of the most spectacular kind.